talking with Sophia Edwards from the University of Queensland. We talked about reproduction and artificial insemination. Firstly, what were you looking at with the research that you undertook?
So during my PhD, essentially we were looking at how Brahmins in particular respond to these synchrony programs. So we use a series of normal reproductive hormones which we use to manipulate their cycle. So we know that our Brahmin heifers are struggling, not struggling, they just tend to be less than what we get in British bred cattle and particularly in cows. So what I wanted to know was how they responded and where can I then take that to be able to improve pregnancy rates in the future.
Why was it important to know how they responded?
Because we didn't know why. Essentially we knew that we weren't getting excellent pregnancy rates, but we didn't know why. So my job was to characterise what was going on when we use these series of drugs, what happened to their ovaries, where was their potential to be able to change things.
So you mentioned a series of drugs.
Yep.
What sort of drugs were you looking at and what impact did they have on the ovaries' performance?
Okay, so essentially we just use normal reproductive hormones. They're just synthetic compounds of them. So we use progesterone, estradiol and prostaglandin. They're the three main reproductive hormones. And those it's a little bit complex, but essentially they all cause cascades of other reproductive hormones. So one of my biggest findings was that we don't need too much progesterone. Essentially, all the intravaginal progesterone devices, particularly the CEDA, was developed for dairy cows who have a high metabolic rate, higher clearance of progesterone in the system. When we translate that back to a Brahmin animal, they actually are more sensitive to these drugs. So we actually halve the dose of progesterone, and we found that caused less suppression and improved follicular growth. And it may give us, it does, and in some cases only may give us benefits in terms of reproductive pregnancy rates.
So you say it may, so are there any take-home messages, particularly for the Brahmin industry, as you said, that can use the information you've gathered to improve their fertility and their reproductive performance of their cows and heifers?
Yeah, reproduction's a really hard science to be involved in. It is so grey. There is never black and white, and as soon as you think it's black and white, it's going to prove you wrong the next time. And the reason I say may is some herds, sometimes you see benefits, other times you just don't. And you really can't pinpoint why that may be. Essentially, in terms of where can we go forward with the Indicus cattle and what have you, we are constantly fine-tuning best practice management for them. So at the end of the day, if you just use best practice management at every time point, try and optimise every level of it, essentially you will get the best possible result.
So are there any messages to go back to the Bos Taurus industry?
Yeah, there is. Essentially, these things all work in Bos Taurus. They also work in composites. So the reason we work with the Brahmin is because if we work with, say, a crossbred, Bos Indicus, Bos Taurus, or we just work with the Bos Taurus, it doesn't translate back to the Indicus. However, what we've found, my research in the Brahmins has actually effectively worked in the Angus. So Bayer and Binish have been heavily supporting the Angus benchmarking project, and throughout that they've done a series of AI programs, and they have been using my Bos Indicus protocols in the Angus heifers and achieving quite excellent results. So essentially I'm working at the other end, but it does translate through.
Sophia Edwards from the University of Queensland, thanks for talking at Agribusiness today.
Thank you very much.